This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
May the favor of Cain be upon you.
What are we talking about tonight, Puka?
Well, for those who don't know about Cain, we will be evangelizing. No, we're not going to really do that. We'll be talking about Vampire, the Masquerade, the one core splat of the World of Darkness that we haven't yet discussed in terms of its crossover potential with Changeling. And joining us is special guest Chigg.
Hi, Chigg.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chigg. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, yeah, where people have might heard you before, Chigg, if they recognize your voice.
Oh, I get around. I'm on Darker Days Radio. I'm one of the co-hosts there. If you are a listener of Mage the Podcast, I am the Mythos correspondent over there. I've been on a couple of episodes there, but mostly I'm just online. So,
Huzzah!
Huzzah. So, Chigg, what's a vampire?
what is a vampire? That's a fantastic question. A vampire in the World of Darkness, we're assuming that we're just talking about the Western vampires here because the Eastern ones are a whole different kettle of fish. A vampire is a blood-drinking member of the undead who are the secret masters of all cities who rule the night and are possibly descended from Cain, the guy from the Bible.
Okay.
That's the most popular theory.
The first murderer, or so they say.
Indeed. So the vampires, because it is a World of Darkness, it is the first World of Darkness game, and it set the standard for everything that came after. They like to group themselves up into various sects and groups called bloodlines. They're the equivalent of the Changeling Kith, or clans, I guess. Clans are the bigger ones, bloodlines are the smaller little offshoots. There are 13 core clans, and there's just, at last count, there were close to or past 200 different bloodlines.
More than Changeling Kiths?
When I did the count, yes, there were, well, this was before C20. There were more vampire bloodlines than there were changeling kits.
But given that Vampire had the much longer history and much greater density of
So many more books. Oh my god, so many more books.
they just kept making bloodlines.
They're real easy to make.
Yeah, and some of them have like 4 vampires or something in their bloodline.
Yeah. It's, two guys in Cincinnati. They're a bloodline. Congratulations.
Yeah.
This actually, as a question for both of you, and I'll answer it as well, but what is your experience with Vampire the Masquerade, out of curiosity?
Vampire the Masquerade is the first World of Darkness game line that I picked up. I read through it, and I immediately put it back down and said, why would anybody want to play a vampire? That's dumb. They're the bad guys. I was about 12 at the time, so forgive me. I later came back to it when I was a little bit older, and I've enjoyed playing Vampire off and on over the years ever since. I've run many games. It is the only LARP I have ever done twice. It kind of fell apart after a while, but that's the way of LARPs, apparently. I have a bit of history playing Vampire.
Okay. For me, Vampire was the first World of Darkness book I read. And I mostly was like, oh, look, fairies go to... It must have... I don't know what edition it was first or second, but it talked about, like, high-level aspect. You could go to the moon and visit the fairies, and I thought that was kind of cool. And after I got into Changeling LARPs and stuff, I did some Vampire LARPing. Occasionally played, like, one-shots in tabletop games, and mostly just used them as antagonists sometimes in my Changeling or Mage games. So, but...
They do make great antagonists.
Yeah. I'm very... I don't know, like I don't dislike the game, but I'm not like a huge fan of it either. So it's kind of, but it's just one of those, if you're in the World of Darkness stuff long enough, you pick up a lot about it.
Yeah, it accretes around every other World of Darkness game.
Yeah, it's the D&D of World of Darkness.
It is in my top 5 World of Darkness games.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the lowest, so that's good.
Yeah, it's not Hunter.
Yeah, for me, I similarly picked it up at age 12 and was kind of like, huh, okay. But my one sibling and I got like really into it and gamed it a lot. There was a brief period in high school when we were like making websites and stuff, but then I always kind of saw it as like the gateway game to finding other better World of Darkness games, not just for myself, but for other people. Because I feel like if you try to start someone off with Mage, that's just not going to go well. Um,
Mm.
but Vampire, at least, like you said, you understand intuitively, like, oh, I'm the monster, and then you're off to the
Hmm.
races. So,
Changeling, I think you can be a gateway game too for World of Darkness, but yeah, it's
I think vampire and to a lesser degree werewolf are the two big easy
hmm
gets,
yeah.
and
mechanically.
that's why they're
Werewolf just has the one get.
the.
Yeah, Vampire I'd say is the simplest mechanically to wrap your head around of all the World of
Hmm.
Darkness games.
Sure,
So,
absolutely, and it only has one world to deal with, so that's something that
hmm
it has, and none of the other World of Darkness games have.
Well, for any listeners who are not familiar with Vampire the Masquerade, it might behoove us to kind of just define a couple key terms and some of the particulars of vampires in Vampire the Masquerade. So, the disciplines that we're alluding to are the powers, much like the arts and realms, although they don't
hmm
have to get realms, so lucky them.
However, each discipline is only has one use per level, so
True.
you can use Wayfair to jump from here to there yourself, or you can have your buddy jump from here to there. But if you have Potence, you can only make yourself stronger.
Yep.
hmm
Until you get to elder level disciplines, and that's a whole separate.
Oh, Vampire does have the power stat that you don't need like to read the write up on to understand what it is. It's blood.
That's true.
You have blood, and it is literally blood.
It
So,
is the amount of blood that you have drunk from a living being.
yeah, or undead potentially.
Maybe.
Well, term wise, once it's inside the vampire body, it becomes vitae. But yeah, it's blood.
I remember some character sheets saying the official character sheet saying blood points, but anyway.
That's an out of game term.
Yeah. That's like quintessence points.
Exactly.
Yeah, but quintessence. If I say to somebody on the street, "What's a quintessence?" They'll or a glamour would not
Yeah.
assume what it is.
Well, and on the subject of blood, vampires can also use their blood to make themselves stronger, faster, etc., to heal their wounds, to appear human for a time. In terms of the traditional lore, sunlight burns them, but crosses don't repel them. They occasionally have to go into a deep sleep called torpor. So, they've
Hmm.
got lives or unlives.
Oh, they also need the blood to
Hey,
wake up in the morning, right? Or no, in the evening.
Yes.
Sorry,
yeah, you don't wake up in the morning if you're a vampire. You're gonna have a bad time.
that's
Yeah.
the reverse vampire book we need.
They also have, uniquely among the old World of Darkness games at least, they have humanity as a core stat. This was replaced by other potential morality tracks in later editions, but yeah,
Hmm.
you can quantize the humanity of a vampire.
Yeah, that's the basics.
It's a nice little downward spiral.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The more you exist as a vampire, the harder it is to hold on to your humanity, and it's quantifiable. It's right there.
Hmm. Absolute objective morality system of saying some things are worse than other things, and makes me go what? But
And occasionally vampires go into frenzy and just lose control completely and
yeah,
attack whatever is in their path.
But they feel bad about it later, and that's what's important.
what's the Masquerade? The title Vampire the Masquerade.
The Masquerade is the reason that you don't know until listening to this podcast that vampires walk among you.
Hmm.
The vampires, in an effort not to be hunted to extinction, decided a couple hundred years ago now that, hey, there's a lot of people out there, and there's more and more people every day, and there's only so many of us. So if people found out that we existed, they would hunt us down because, hey, we sometimes kill them for food, and they don't like that.
Hmm.
So they decided to enact the masquerade, where they do everything in their power to appear as a normal human being. They, in theory, have jobs. They look like they have jobs anyway. They don't use their freaky magical vampire powers to turn into a bat and fly around in front of you. They don't leave exsanguinated corpses lying around. They have people for that to come clean up after them if that happens accidentally, oopsie doodle.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Masquerade is the self-imposed on at least one of the three main sects, sometimes two of the three main sects, depending on how the independents are doing in your area, the anarchs,
Mm-hmm.
that keeps vampires hidden from humanity.
So what are these sects you're talking about?
Vampires, even though they're dead, love sects. So there are, as previously mentioned, there are three primary sects. There's the Camarilla, or Camarilla, or depending on how you pronounce it. That is the group that decided that the Masquerade would be a great idea. They are primarily concerned with temporal power here in the real world. They're not interested as a whole. These are stereotypes. They're not interested in any magical power, nothing outside the realm of just we are people. This is how we live, even though we are undead. They keep other vampires in line. They rule a majority of cities. They have a council of elders. They're ruled. Every city that they control is ruled by a prince at the top, and it's just a pyramidal structure down from there. The second of the two biggest sects is the Sabbat. They are kind of the opposite of the Camarilla, and they were originally introduced as these are the bad guy vampires because they aren't human. They're not even trying.
That reminds me, we should probably say we are talking about Vampire the Masquerade 20th edition and earlier. There's a 5th edition, but Changeling doesn't have a 5th edition, and the 5th edition changed the setting. We're just
Yeah.
gonna
The 5th edition upends most of the things we'll probably be talking about.
Yeah.
So we'll just set that aside. For anyone who knows about it, we're not talking about that right now.
It is a similar but legally distinctly different game.
Yeah. I promise once we release Changeling 5th edition, we'll talk about it.
You guys have fun with that. So the Sabbat, as I was saying, are kind of the opposite of the Camarilla. The Camarilla imposed the Masquerade, and they kind of enforce it on their members. The Sabbat does not care. They are monsters. They eat people. They are predators. They do not care who knows about it. They have territory that they rule. They have cities that they're in charge of. Those cities tend to have much higher crime rates, much higher disappearances of tourists and people who are just visiting the city and residents because the vampires there will eat you and they do not care.
So if they don't care, does that mean all the people there know about vampires?
You would think that's what that would mean, right? Because they don't really have so much of a masquerade. But no, somehow that's not what that means. No, the Sabbat, when I say that they don't really care, they don't get involved with people. They don't see themselves as human beings anymore. So they avoid people not because they're hiding from them, but because they are other from them, if that makes sense. And they are the more spiritual of the two main sects. The Camarilla are primarily, like I said, motivated by greed and power here in the real world, whereas the Sabbat are the more mystic woo-woo vampires who are trying to, raise themselves above humanity to be, a more perfect predator.
I think of it as like the Camarilla is like when you especially ask socialists about like or left about capitalism, they'll talk about it's similar to the Camarilla, how to describe it. And then the Sabbat is a weird amalgamation of all sorts of groups that don't make any sense together. At least in terms of like as a metaphor for human society.
They're a big tent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the anarchs, the independents, the group that is not really a group. It's just we don't want to belong to one of these other groups. So this is what we are. We're an independent. We're not monsters like the Sabbat wants us to be, but also we're not going to necessarily hide ourselves away like the Camarilla wants to.
So
and
all the humans know about them.
You would think, but no. Again, the Camarilla does a really good job. One of the things that the Camarilla is said to control is media, and they do a really good job of covering up, 30 corpses found with no blood buried, in a shallow grave outside of town. Even if the town is not one that the Camarilla is in charge of.
In my headcanon, conspiracy theories about vampires in the world of darkness is like Bigfoot or alien abductions or something in the real world. Like you probably know.
Or vampires in the real world.
Yeah, but I've come across less people who think that there's real vampires, like supernatural vampires going around drinking blood, than think there's like alien abductions. So
Well, it's different for me, but I used to go goth clubbing, so
Yeah, no, that's where I meet people who think they're vampires. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing.
And most of them played Vampire the Masquerade, so
nah. I think it's also important to point out for the Camarilla and the Sabbat, at least, another sort of philosophical difference is their attitude towards their history, like vampire history. So within the mythology of the game, Cain being the first vampire, he got lonely. He went out and embraced three more who became known as the second generation. They embraced a bunch of others who became the third generation, etc., etc. And then there was a city built somewhere in the Middle East, supposedly, and then the flood from Genesis wiped it out, and a second city was built. And in these first and second cities was where vampires sort of ruled over mortals openly. But the third generation, because they predate the flood, are called antediluvians. I think vampires were actually learned that word.
yeah.
That's where I learned that word.
But so the Camarilla sort of line is, oh, the antediluvians are just a myth, and the Sabbat are like, no, they're real, and we don't like
Yeah.
them.
Although keeping in mind there are mechanically third generation vampires from after the flood, if there was a flood. But
Well, and part of the reason for that is because vampires can eat their elders to become more powerful.
but only ever eat someone one level up from you, because otherwise you don't get the
Yeah, only
benefits.
eat your dad.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
eat your grandpa, you're going to have a bad time. You heard it here first, folks.
So that actually ties into this whole generation thing, which I know some people get confused because mechanically on your sheet you have this generation background and you might go from 0 to 5 or potentially higher, at least for an NPC.
Yeah.
But it counts from like Cain is first generation and then second generation and third generations, the antediluvians, and fourth generations, and the default. So 0 generation background is 13th generation. So
Yeah,
In a modern game.
in a modern game.
yeah.
I never found it particularly difficult to understand, and I was kind of
Yeah.
perplexed when people did. Like when you think about first place, second place, third place, like that's pretty easy to
Yeah.
conceive.
The people who find it hard are also people who find other math concepts hard. So
Fair. All right.
But yes, the closer you are, to Cain, the more power you have.
Yeah. And it's a big deal for vampires.
yeah, because every time you make a vampire, they're one higher generation than you. So if you were 8th generation, you
Yes, the blood becomes thinner and thinner, and you are
Mhm.
less able to use blood efficiently. Basically, you cannot be as powerful as the generation before you.
which means game mechanically it's very advantageous to put into the background.
And it also lends itself to games that are structured around finding and hunting down and eating your, well, maybe not your grandpa, but your other elders.
Although that also it's called diablerie, and it's
Mhm.
considered illegal in a Camarilla game at least. Very very bad because the elders are the ones setting the rules and they don't want to get eaten.
Well, so one of the things we haven't really discussed in is Vampire Society is they have a lot of rules and a lot of strictures to keep themselves in line. And one of the things that I mentioned previously is that every Camarilla city is ruled by a prince. The prince has a group of elders that advise him, but basically his word is law in that city. And the prince can grant you special dispensation, and not just you, but he can say, "Hey, I want Jim the vampire over there. I want him dead. Anybody can kill him, and if you kill him, you can eat him."
But you can also say you can kill them, but you can't eat them.
He can also say, "I want him dead, but do not dare eat Jim the vampire." Yes, because he's the prince, so he can say whatever he wants. It's good to be the prince.
Yeah, I never quite got my head around it because there is still this higher level in the Camarilla, and I never quite understood how that works. So, despite reading books and people telling me, I still don't understand what a Justicar is versus a prince and all that stuff.
Well, the Justicars are by clan rather than by city.
Yeah, that's the council of advisors basically. And in an ideal world, every clan in the city would have one person on this little council of
Well, that's a
Justicars.
primogen, right?
Primogen is at the city level,
Yeah.
Right.
the advisors to the prince, but the Justicars are the entire Camarilla, one representative per clan,
Yeah.
advisory board slash. I mean, there's the judges.
Yeah, but I'm just what the higher level thing is versus the princes is where I always get confused, like how that works, because it's like a prince's rule is law, but there's a higher law, but not.
Well,
Well, someone's got to keep the whole thing running.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the and I mean, come on, guys, it's the world of darkness. It doesn't have to make sense. Come on,
There's
come
always
on.
another layer of secrets and
How
people
many
pulling
she knights are there,
strings.
and how many of them are landed?
I
Come
guess
on.
it's kind of like the head of a she house versus like the nobility and monarch, like
There you go.
High King David versus the head of House Gwydion. What is that relationship? We don't know.
Fraught.
Yep.
We do know. We just reviewed that book.
Yeah. Well, it said it was
Listen.
fraught, right?
Yeah.
Oh well, there you go.
But how it actually plays out is kind of
Yeah.
also I'm still unclear on. But maybe it's about as unclear both.
But that is one of the sort of thematic things that I think Vampire has become known for and is to some degree founded on, that survival of the fittest kind of idea, which frankly I've seen play out with a lot of players in addition to
Yep.
the characters. But I also wanted to point to, as you said, Chig, because it was the first World of Darkness game, it kind of set the tone for the others. And the World of Darkness games have always billed themselves as these gothic punk experiences. And Vampire is, I mean, I think back to when I first picked up the Vampire second edition core book as a wee child. And that was the most spelling out of gothic punk that I think they have done in any of the books.
I think First Ed is even more spelling it out. But yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, first edition it carries through in a
Yeah.
lot of the art and everything as well. But
Well, sure. I'm pretty sure that Mark Reinhagen invented goth punk as an aesthetic.
yeah,
So yeah, that makes perfect sense.
yeah, lots of crumbling churches and rust belt infrastructure and
Yeah.
people sleeping on street corners and
Yeah, and that gets into a tension between writers of the game or developers, where like the original idea was more you're at the bottom and
yeah,
you can. It's sort of a punk like you're kind of never gonna rise up, and it's about banding together and trying to get through this unlife. But then a lot of it's more about these high level politics and stuff. So it's kind of
Well, one thing that you have to think of in vampire society is that if you think of it as this is your job, okay? Your job is you are Puka the vampire, right?
it's me.
You've just been embraced. Congratulations. Welcome to the afterlife.
Oh, I hope I'm a Toreador.
You are Puka the Toreador, beautiful
Awesome.
in every way. The person who embraced you is called your sire, and they are, they're your mentor. They brought you into this world. They're teaching you the ropes. You'll have a job under them basically here in the Camarilla, and they are under somebody else, and they are under somebody else, and they're under somebody else. Now, in a regular job here in the real world, where Puka presumably has a job, and I have a job, and Josh, you have a job, you can move up in the world. Eventually, your boss will retire, and you can apply for the boss's job. Great, awesome. Nobody retires from the Camarilla. When you're a vampire forever.
mm-hmm.
There's there until someone dies or decides, hey, wait a minute, this whole masquerade thing, that's silly. And in fact, the antediluvians, they are real, and they decide to jump ship and join the Sabbat, which happens practically never. They're not really big on recruiting.
Hmm.
Until then, you are stuck in a static position in this organization forever.
Yeah.
That was the initial idea, is that you are the lowest of the low and you have no real happy outlook of ever moving up from that position.
Mm-hmm.
And people say vampires aren't banal.
I worked at a company that was structured that way. It was not fun.
Yeah, now imagine that for the rest of time.
Was it run by vampires?
Uh, I'm not sure. Well, it's like I don't actually know who ran the company. It was like this secret group above the president that we never really learned about. It was
Yeah.
very weird.
I think it's very telling, though, that the game came out in 1991, where you had sort of like the exhaustion from the excesses of the power hungry 80s feeding into like the bleak, gritty 90s kind of aesthetic.
Yeah, that was a big recession right around then too, wasn't there?
There was a lot going on in that period. I mean, we could probably go on talking for a long time about Vampire the game, but I
Yeah.
did mention the Toreador, who are one of the major clans of the Camarilla, and this might be a good segue into talking about some of the others.
It might.
Yeah, and the whole banality thing, maybe how it applies to a changeling game is probably the because you said there was like how many clans and 200 bloodlines. I don't think we want to elaborate all of
All
them.
right, so we're gonna start alphabetically. Okay, so there's the bloodline. We will not be doing that.
Well, I have on my list. I have the ones who have the most connective tissue, I suppose, with changelings.
That
But
makes sense. We don't need to cover every clan and every bloodline.
yeah,
So first is Daughters of Cacophony, right? That's the most important for Changeling.
I'd like to think so. Maybe we should start with the Ravnos, though. I think they're the ones that changelings have the most reason to be afraid of.
So, Clan Ravnos, and please keep in mind that Vampire the Masquerade is from the early 90s. Clan Ravnos was originally the. There's really not a good way to say it, but they were the ethnic stereotype Romani clan to begin with.
Yeah.
They were the thieves and the tricksters and the ones who would come in the night and steal your women and blah blah blah.
And very explicitly as such, not even.
Yeah, they did nothing to hide this. It was right there, black and white. They did not use the term Romani, so
Yeah.
they've made it better in more recent editions, but originally it was not great. But yes, they are the tricksters. They are the ones who make you question your reality, that kind of thing. And they have a discipline called chemistry or chemistry, or I've heard it pronounced a dozen different ways. They don't ever provide a real pronunciation guide. And chemistry is the ability to create illusions. But turns out that what they're actually creating are chimera. Thus the term chemistry.
Chimerical chemistry.
Yeah, exactly. So they can put an illusion of a wall or an illusion of a floor in a building that has that the floor is rotted out, and Bryce the vampire goes walking across there, falls down into the basement, and bonks its little head.
No.
But if Puka the Puka walks across there, he Bugs Bunnies his way right across the whole floor, because to him it's real. It's a chimeric floor.
That's got to be a great scene. Like the Ravnos is thinking, I've created an illusionary floor and my prey will fall directly into the trap I've prepared. And then like the changeling just walks right across.
And then they make a chimerical flying carpet, and then things get really confusing.
Well, then they make a chimeric gun and just shoot you dead.
Exactly.
Correct.
No, but you fly on anyway.
Yeah, so the Ravnos are not great news for changelings when they can make chimera at will. And it is actually at will because they have to spend willpower to do it, but no.
Yeah, generally, none of these vampires are going to be your friends, probably, in a changeling game.
A friend is a vampire you just haven't met yet.
Yeah.
But one who could potentially be a friend, because we have hard evidence that it's easier to muse them, are the Malkavians.
Yeah, so again, remember, early 90s, no sensitivity readers on the first edition of Vampire the Masquerade. And again, it has improved since then. Clan Malkavian began as the crazy clan, the clan with mental illnesses. It's baked right into every Malkavian. If you remember this clan, you have to have a mental illness of some sort.
They didn't use that word, though. Originally.
I'm sorry?
They didn't use that term originally either.
No, they do not use that word. Again, it has improved a bit. It could be anything from just, you have obsessive compulsive disorder. That's the vampire that has to count all the grains of rice when you throw it on the ground. Or in less good Malkavian portrayals, it could just be, hey, you're wacky, and there's a whole term for that, but we won't get into that.
Yep. Everything, they're like Puka, but the bad stereotypes about Puka.
Yes.
And with Bedlam mixed in.
Well,
yes. But again, not all Malkavians are like that, and it has gotten much better over the years. But to begin with, yes, they were the cuckoo wacky ones. And why are they cuckoo and wacky? Because they see a deeper truth. They can see reality as it truly is, broken and fractured. They can have visions of the truth. They can know things without having been taught them, because they're tapped into reality.
it seems like over the years they've tried to find a number of different ways to integrate them with changeling or fairy stuff because, I mean, folklorically, when you talk about madness of different kinds, like the Fae often enter into it. But there are so many different options and can sometimes seem like because in one book it's like, oh, okay, they get addicted to fairy blood if they drink it. In another book it's, oh, it has no effect on them because they're already kind of kooky. Or, oh, maybe they're basically enchanted and they can just see the fae. Or, oh,
Yeah.
they can visit Arcadia. So,
And then they give the books talk about like what the banality rating is of these various clans, and sometimes suggesting no, this clan, everyone in this clan is this banality rating, which the clans are not that set. But
If you're just having a one shot, when you meet a La Sombra, it's good to have a baseline.
hmm
mm.
but it kind of gets confusing when you look at, especially like C20's portrayal of mental illness and banality, and then you look at like, oh, but all the Malkavians have a low banality. You're like, wait a sec.
The game comes free. You have to add the nuance later. Or actually, not free.
Yeah, they have a mental illness, and they may or may not always be able to tell a changeling just by looking at them,
hmm
depending on the edition.
Although with Auspex, which is one of the disciplines that the Malkavians have easy access to, you can figure out if somebody's a changeling fairly easily too.
Correct, and Auspex, of course, is one of the disciplines that so many of these groups have. It's
hmm
it's I don't know if it's the most common superpower for vampires, but it is up there.
Yeah.
Well, unless you count blood magic, because everyone and their brother has blood magic now.
Well, everyone's got potence or fortitude or celerity.
Well,
The
celerity,
big.
no. Celerity's rare. As it should be, frankly. Anyway.
Well, but yeah, there's another clan that has a lot of. To me, when I think changeling crossover, I'd actually think this clan first is Toreador,
Yes. The Anracians.
which are
Toreador, and remember, this is from the '90s, so
yeah, they're all
not the
bullfighters.
best. Those are the artistes of the vampire world. They're broken usually into two different, subgroups within their clan. There are the artists and there are the art appreciators, the Epicureans. But yes, as artists and patrons of the art, it makes sense that these are the kindred that Changing would most likely run into on a night to night basis.
hmm
Sometimes antagonistically.
Well, sometimes antagonistically, but sometimes just because, you're both going to a museum show
The Goth Club.
or a goth club or, whatever. They're having an art show over here. You both go to visit your people that you are a patron of. And hey, look, that lady you saw, 20 years ago when you were but a wee young puka, and she appears to be unchanged. Isn't that weird?
That strangely pale, unchanging woman.
Yeah, so she's obviously a she. Anyway, yeah, they can have antagonistic or just, hey, I know a guy relationships with plenty of the Fae.
That's also one where you could do crossover without it being apparent from either game, without it being apparent that crossover's happening.
Yeah, but what's the fun in having secret crossover? Who you keeping the secret from here?
No. Like the secret, 3 sessions in, you figure out something's up. That's what I mean. Not as opposed to like right away you know something's up, but you're still antagonistic or something. Or
Gotcha.
whatever.
So yeah, Toreadors are a nice, fun source of crossover material.
They are my favorite clan, I'll admit,
Mm-hmm.
out of the main. My least favorite is the Tremere, the Blood Wizards. And I'm a little bit unfair to them, I think, because I think it's primarily just because I've seen them played badly so many times. There has
Yeah.
been a trend in, I guess, vampire circles. Some people used to call it vampians, where it was less about getting into the gothic punk aesthetic and exploring the personal horror, because that was what Vampire sold itself on, being a game of personal horror. Less about that and more about how many dots of all the disciplines can I get to go around and
Mm.
mess things up.
Mm.
So when you introduce a clan who also happen to be wizards, it tends to draw, the kinds of people that want to have all the power like that.
They're also the one though where the clan flaw is your clan's kind of telling you what to do more than the other clans get happening to them. And whether or not the storyteller leans on that is a different question.
Right. Basically, every Tremere player I've ever seen has like made it a cornerstone of their character to be like, yeah, I don't care what the elders say.
Well, I've mostly done vampire LARPs where it's like, oh, okay, well, they end up an NPC in about stop being a PC in about 3 sessions when they do that.
Well, it's nice when their feet are held to the figurative fire.
Mm-hmm.
In any case,
Sometimes buy another PC Tremere, but
yeah.
Yeah, because that other PC Tremere wants to work his way up the corporate ladder over there at Clan Tremere.
yeah, they're the ones that are crossover with the Order of Hermes from them when we did our mage episode with Terry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, Clan Tremere, as mentioned previously, are the super sorcerer magic vampires. If you run into a Tremere, they are almost assuredly going to be antagonists. They're to collect your Fey blood for their dark rituals, to do whatever they're going to do with that magical blood you have. They're not there to make friends. They're not there to gain influence over you or anything like that. They're either going to eat you or experiment upon you horribly until you are almost assuredly dead.
They might use you to find more of your friends so they can get more blood from all them too.
Oh, sure, you could
Yeah.
you could have a long and fulfilling career as a Judas goat if you so desire.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Tremere, as far as Changeling are concerned, and they're one of my favorite clans. The Tremere are not going to be your friend.
And they're one of the few clans that not only believe that fairies exist, but generally are more likely to know how they work.
And if they don't, they'll pull you apart until they figure it out.
Right. Well, and speaking of pulling people apart, we can talk about my second least favorite clan, which is the Samisi. And again, I think it's primarily because of the way I've seen them played more often
Mhm.
than not.
Samisi are like, well, the Tremere are too normal and human like.
Right.
I want to be weird arcane rituals, but like also reshape people's bodies.
Right. So the Zamishi or Zimishe or Zimish or what have you, they are a
The Sims.
yeah, them guys, the ones that start with TZ. They are Brian Lumley necroscope vampires, and people told me that before I read any of the Brian Lumley books. But then I read the first one. I'm like, oh yes, this is a direct ripoff of these books. So, in addition to being blood sucking monsters who are one of the two main clans of the Sabbat, which is the group that is made up entirely of monsters, their super special personal discipline is called vicissitude, and they can use it to reshape flesh, bones, living, undead, whatever. They are also almost assuredly not going to be your friend if you run into them.
Mhm.
However, in extreme circumstances, depending on what exactly your musing threshold is, depending on how extreme the body modification your red cap is into, Zamishi could be a social contact.
I think the changelings they're most likely to have not friendship with, but like some kind of not entirely antagonistic interaction would probably be Thalane or
Yeah.
other Shadow Court kind of things. So
Yeah, they're a great source of dark glamour.
yeah.
Yeah, back in the day, there was all the bad guys in the world of darkness worked together. So there was a lot of the Shadow Court is in league with the
Right.
Sabbat.
The other thing with the Simisi too, though, I feel when they're played well, is that philosophically some of them have this drive towards like transformation and metamorphosis and exploring truly bizarre dreams and some truly messed up ones. But I could see that playing into a very particular kind of changeling narrative as well, which is maybe less burn things down, mess things up than Shadow Court games tend to
Yeah.
turn into.
They'd probably be annoyed at a changeling for going through the changeling way versus
Yeah.
what they were before.
This is also literally the clan of Dracula in the game, so they have that
Yeah.
kind of, overlord in the mountains in a castle doing unholy things by night
Which is
vibe.
also lifted directly from Necroscope.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
They also are the one of the clans, not as much as Tremere, but one of the clans that still has some sort of blood magic. Some of them.
Oh, they all have
Technically.
blood magic now.
I mean, depending on your definition of magic, if I can lift a car by
Mhm.
by using blood, that's magic. But
They
yes, I know
might
what you
also
mean.
want your blood for weird things too. Just
Oh
Yes.
yeah. They're gonna take you and experiment upon you and use your blood as a way to make more monsters that they can send against the Camarilla.
mhm.
That being said, they are very respectful to the ones they actually invite as guests in good faith.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, they're great guys. If you can get them to be nice to you once.
If they think of you as a person, you're great. They just don't think of many
Right.
as people.
It's a
So
high bar.
Well, they don't think of themselves as people, so...
yeah. Well, human. I meant people.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
They're like worse than she.
So then the other driving clan of the Sabbat is the La Sombra, who I don't know that there's actually much to say about them in particular, as or at least not as much as one of the bloodlines that spun off from them, which is the Chiacid. And that's probably the most intentionally direct connection between the two games.
So the La Sombra are the rulers of the Sabbat. They are the think
The
House
House Aelil.
Aileel. Yeah, think House Aileel. They are the manipulators, the darkly seductive vampire. They are the ones who they don't count him as a member. But if you think of Count Dracula, he's out there seducing the ladies of London. This is who you're thinking of.
And they get weird shadow powers as
They do have really neato mosquito shadow powers. I agree, but they're on the list because if you're going to have a political game, a game of politics in your changeling kingdom, barony, whatever, and you want to have some antagonists or allies that people that you're plotting against might not see coming or might not think of, La Sombra are a good bet. They are, as previously mentioned, they believe themselves to be royalty. They hold themselves to a high standard. They think of themselves as plotters and manipulators, kind of a power behind the throne sort of group. So if you are she and you want to have some allies in your area who are also equally regal and in charge of things, La Sombra might be a good group to reach out to.
Might be.
Yeah.
Big might.
Big M, little Ite. On the same token, the
Definitely
Ventru,
not on the Sealy side.
no. Ventru are more likely to deal with the Sealy, but
Yeah, but even then,
they're rulers in the captain of industry kind of
yeah,
world.
they're the ones where it's like, oh, okay, I see what you mean by high banality vampires. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, also that.
They're like a lot less nuanced than the Gwydion House Gwydion, I think.
They are the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
But then the La Sombra also gave rise to the Chiacid, who are the Fey vampires. There's bits in the lore about how La Sombra many centuries ago experimented with mysterious blood things. It always comes back to the blood magic, and transformed into 8 foot tall, blue skinned, completely featureless, black eyed vampires who had fairy powers.
But not
And
troll based ones, despite being tall.
no, no, no. Well, and they also kind of changed it in 20th edition. Now they're not all like porcelain blue skinned, but now they have like weird fingers and other things, other signs of Fey.
The Chiacid have shown up in a good half dozen books, and every time they show up, they have a different
Yeah.
different backstory, different group of powers. They are a weird group.
And they've never been like prominent in Vampire, but
No,
yeah.
no. You mentioned earlier that there's there's a bloodline with like 4 people. That's the Chiacid.
Yes.
And also for a group that's supposedly connected to changelings, they do a lot of sitting in libraries and reading for just decades at a time. Which, to be fair, if I was a vampire, I'd sit in a lot of libraries and read a lot of books. I'm not holding that against them, but it seems a very static existence.
Mm-hmm.
They also have this discipline called Mythoceria, which I think it's the second level, they can see all things Fey. So in effect, they can enchant themselves. It doesn't work quite the same way, but for the purposes of interaction between the two splats, they're the ones who would most directly be able to perceive all things chimerical.
Mm-hmm.
They'd probably be friendlier about it than the Ravnos or the Smisi would, but
Mm-hmm. And there's 2 clans I think of as very Kith specific interaction with changelings. So there's despite the Chiacid seeming like maybe they should hang with the Slua, the books talk about how the Nosferatu would hang out with the Slua.
just one big happy information network family.
Yeah, they're like Slua if the Slua, not nearly as pretty and hot as Slua, and
More teeth than the Slua.
or less, depending on.
Well, they have at least 2.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Nosferatu, those are Nosferatu. If you Google image search Nosferatu, they're the super ugly vampires. They
Hmm.
cannot have a appearance score higher than 0 unless they spend a lot of points on a one specific background that lets you raise it all the way up to 1 appearance point.
Hmm. They're the speaking of that masquerade thing. Seeing their face is generally a masquerade violation.
Yeah.
Yes, but they all have the obfuscation power
Yep.
that lets them change the way that they look to others.
There's also some tilt at the Nosferatu being sort of sometimes they're presented as more monstrous than other vampires, but then there are other writers who take them in the direction of, oh, they're surprisingly cool to be around.
Hmm.
So having tea with a Slua is not out of character necessarily for them.
I don't know if they drink the tea, but yes. But-
Having tea is different than drinking tea.
yeah.
So there's a nice little three-way crossover with the Slua, the Nosferatu, and the Bone Gnawers from
Hmm.
Hmm.
Werewolf. They're all the kind of lowest group socially in the social hierarchy. They're all information brokers, and they all are most likely to have contacts with another group of supernaturals. So
Although the Bone Gnawers also would be crossover somewhat with another vampire clan, which also I think corresponds with a Kith, although it's not spelled out as much in the books, with the Bruja, which
Mm.
are not witches. They're like they were the punks in the goth punk world of darkness, at least originally, but they're also much more like active on the streets or interacting with mortals that the human society doesn't interact with as much or doesn't.
the Bruja are the rabble rousers and the
Yeah.
rebels of the Camarilla.
Which to me means they go in the same circles that redcaps go in a lot of. So
Speaking of Kith connections, something that we talked about in our Wraith crossover episode, I believe, are the Giovanni, who are the necromancer vampires. So, in terms of a Slua connection, if your Slua is the type to talk to ghosts, the Giovanni are more the type to bind, command, and occasionally eat ghosts.
or do other things to them. Yeah.
Or that.
Yeah, the Giovanni are a real weird group. They have some interesting proclivities. I don't recommend pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, they like to trap ghosts and use ghosts for their own ends because most other vampire groups, despite being undead themselves, have no way to interact with or influence ghosts. So if you are a Giovanni and you can grab a wraith's fetter and you can make that wraith do favors for you or be your thrall, because if they don't, then you'll destroy their wedding ring and they will no longer have a tie to the
Yeah.
living world or whatever, then you have a most other vampire proof spy assassin
Hmm.
monster in your pocket. So the Giovanni are not friends of wraiths.
So if you want to do a crossover, you could have either a wraith who's being manipulated that way, or a friend of the wraith who's another wraith who's a friend of that other wraith being manipulated that way, going to your slew and being like, "Please help."
Yeah. The other clans, I don't know. I think we have covered most of them, but when I think about some of the others, like Gangrel, yeah,
There's probably a book that said they're like Puka, and then everyone went, "What are you talking about?" Because they're animal shapeshifters, but they're not like Puka very much at all.
No, no, there are literally hundreds of other permutations on the kindred idea.
Yeah,
And if there's
like every one of these clans, there's another like one or two obscure bloodlines that also are kind of like that. But
sure,
we should at least lastly mention the Magar, who are a
should
fairly
we?
recent addition.
Should
Well,
we?
just because people are going to come across them.
So the Magar, when I run a campaign, if they show up, the Magar are what happens when a Kithane or a Kinane or Thalane, I suppose, or what have you, when a changeling or a Fey-blooded gets embraced. They have Mytherceria, just like the aforementioned Kiasid. They look super weird, and it can be anything from, hey, you still have your she good looks, to, you look like a dog man because you were a puka who was embraced and turned into a vampire. But yeah.
I feel like they kind of muddied the waters around the Chiasid when they introduced them. Like, because at this point, aren't the Chiasid supposed to be Magar gone right or something? Like,
Well, the Magar were introduced in V20.
yeah.
So they got a 2-page write up in a book, basically.
They also got retconned into Dark Ages.
Well, no. They got retconned into V20 Dark
Yeah,
Ages.
no, that's what I mean. Yes.
Yeah, the whole Dark Ages vampire thing. There was a Vampire of the Dark Ages, and then there was a Dark Ages vampire, and then there was Vampire of the Dark Ages 20th anniversary edition. And these are different games, different editions of sort of the same game ish.
But yeah, I actually like the idea of Magar a lot better than I like the idea of Chiasid,
Hmm.
because it kind of allows for more tragic characters. If you're a Chiasid, this is just who you are. But if you're a Magar, occasionally you'll drink the blood of an enchanted or a whatever a Kithane, and then you'll become enchanted yourself. And hey, wait a minute, didn't you used to be a knight? Didn't you used
Yeah.
to have all these friends? Didn't that used to be your life?
I have the book, but I haven't read that section. Are they like a distinct bloodline, like, or are there like Ventru Magar and Toreador Magar and?
So no, they are absolutely not a distinct bloodline. They are accidents, each and every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's what happens when a Ventru or a Gangrel or a Nosferatu embraces someone with Fey blood or someone who is themselves a changeling.
So they're fative.
Could they be a changeling who's gone through the forgetting, or not? Like, didn't know they were a changeling when they were embraced.
That is shockingly not covered in their
Okay.
2-page write up.
Yeah, because that's the majority of times for most changelings is they don't know they're changelings. So like it's kind of
But yeah, so they get 2 of the 3 disciplines that their sire's clan normally has, and also this weird Chiasid discipline that yeah, they're an odd group and a sad group, and I feel real bad for them because they don't really fit in anywhere. But also, I like the idea of, you are a group of she knights and one of your retinue has gone missing and you track them down and they are being held hostage by this weird vampire who drinks blood from them every night to become enchanted and remember that they too were once a
Mhm.
she knight.
Hmm.
That brings in another weighted crossover. Reminds me of drinking blood the other way. If someone who's not a vampire drinks vampire blood,
Mm-hmm.
a few things happen. One is that can make them start liking that vampire more in a bad way. But another is they can get some minor superpowers from it, kind of some of the vampire powers, just a lesser degree. And canonically, that also gives some banality to the to the change if a changeling does it. And I did play a red cap once that just started eating vampires and then just tried to up how much glamour he could bring in to counteract the banality. But
Well,
yeah,
speaking of red caps, aside from all of the clans and bloodlines, something that is worth thinking about. So there's vampires and what they know about changelings and how they perceive them, but then what do changelings know about vampires? Because vampires have this masquerade. They're invested in not having anyone,
mm-hmm.
including changelings, know much about them. I liked the second edition take where basically changelings are like, oh yeah, vampires are red caps gone wild. But
No, they are red caps gone remarkably tame. No, think about it. Red caps can go out there and they can do anything. They can be a red cap opera singer. They can be a red cap garbage man. They can be a red cap IT guy. Whatever. But vampires, they can only be vampires. They have to live at night. They have to drink blood.
Yeah,
They are red caps who have become static
I
in
think
their.
that's a very particular vector of tame, but I'll roll with it.
I always objected on the grounds that I like red caps with flat teeth, so they can't be vampires.
Oh, other connections we had discussed prior to this recording about the emotional vampirism that changelings engage in
Yeah,
compared with
all
the
your changelings are vampires.
Yeah.
yes, not of the sanguinary type, just of the dreams and emotions type.
Except for some bogeys and the occasional red cap, but yes.
You know what two consenting fae get up to in the privacy of their own home? None of my business.
Okay, that's the some of the satyrs now. Okay,
But yes, all of the changelings in the world, they live off of the glamour produced by the emotions of humanity. They're eating something that humanity produces. They're emotional vampires.
kind of the musing things. Kind of. It's like saying we're like people who drink dairy are cow vampires.
Well, I'm lactose intolerant, so I can't say. But
But it's an interesting kind of thing to explore. I mean, just in terms of that kind of categorization, because there are vampires who are like, I'm not going to eat human blood. I'm going to survive off of animals and blood bank donations or whatever. And, not all vampires see themselves as, I am a predator. So
Well,
it's,
that's because they're parasites, not predators. But anyway.
yes, but that's my point, is that within the society of vampires, within the society of
Yeah.
changelings, different groups are going to have different ways of justifying to themselves what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing to survive, much as humans do in many cases.
Yeah.
yeah, anybody can justify anything if put under enough pressure.
I mean,
Hmm.
changelings, at least as presented, and we can talk if this is unreliable. I don't know if it's unreliable narrator or just like a lot of changelings do have a beneficial place in humans that they muse, but
Or at least they think they do.
yeah, but that's the question: do they or not? But that's also getting to where does glamour come from, and what some changeling books suggest, like if all the changelings went away, there'd be a lot less creative humans. So
This is all kind of part of why I think it's important to thoroughly role play out both hunts and epiphanies. Maybe not
yeah,
every single one, but often enough that players get a handle on the thoughts and feelings that underlie those actions.
that's a connection that changeling and vampire and wraith and demon, but not all the World of Darkness games have that kind of interaction. But changeling and vampire do have it pretty strongly, where it's your relationship to humanity is an important part of the game that a lot of people just ignore, and I
Yeah,
think that does disservice to both games.
I don't think it's something that needs to be done every time.
not every time.
No,
Every time a vampire goes out to hunt or, feed from their herd, which is a background that they can have, just like changeling can have dreamers. I don't think that needs to be role played out in great detail every time.
no,
Just like I don't think every time a changeling says, I'm going to go, use my dreamers, needs to be played out. But I think it's something that every character needs to do at least occasionally.
Yeah,
yeah, just like I think both games actually benefit a lot from outside of the whole feeding aspect. Just both of it for different, very different reasons. But vampires and changelings have a lot of trouble just living their day to day lives. Like, how do you get money? They both have trouble with that. Like, okay, you need a place to sleep at night. How do you deal with that? The everything that comes around with it. Do you own it? Do you hide somewhere and
Do
sleep?
you use your magical mental manipulation powers to make someone, forget
Yeah,
that they have a closet over here in the corner that you sleep in all day?
which has its own costs and consequences. Like it's all
Right.
not that you need to have like that's most of the game, but I think it should be like I don't know a third of your game or something like that.
Yes, there should absolutely be a mundane details section of the game where you
Yeah,
keep track of how do you how you so okay, so you have resources 3 from what? How do
yeah,
you
in both
maintain
games,
that?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Because yeah, vampires are like, well, you're not aging. You might be pretty old actually, even though you look young, and you can't go out in the daytime. Changelings have the whole banality problem, and sometimes they have to go deal with the changeling world when they're well, both of them have to deal with their own worlds, kind of thing.
Right. They'll have that hidden world that they have to deal with. One more so
Yeah,
than the other.
aside from the hierarchical stuff of the Justicars, the princes, etc., in the Camarilla, they also have six traditions that kind of govern. I guess they're more like guidelines than laws, but the prince.
they're like the Ashit, really.
Well, and that's the point that I'm leading to. Yeah. So it's these guiding principles that in theory vampires are like, oh yeah, those are good ideas, but then in practice they bend them maybe more often than not.
Some are more bendable than others, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, most vampire games I've played in that are not Sabbat, which have their own rules. like most Camarilla vampire games I've played in, actually kind of stick to them reasonably closely, in at least in terms of like if you get caught.
Well, a lot of them too are geared around self-preservation or preservation of the community. So even something like you are responsible for the vampire that you create until they are proved to be an accepted member of the community or whatever. That's so that vampire, that fledgling, doesn't go out and eat somebody and leave them in a dumpster for the rest
Yeah,
of the world to find.
yeah, and there's kind of this. I don't know how official it is, or if it's just a thing that shows up in LARPs, or if it's like a part of the thing where like at some point, sort of in the equivalent of your fosterage, or when you come like to be accepted in the vampire society, you're supposed to like recite the traditions to
Right.
the prince. Never list the seventh one of "Don't get caught." That's not usually funny.
That's always a good
Uh,
plan.
I've been in LARPs where the player thought that's one of the traditions, like
Oh
legit.
dear.
Wow. Okay, so they are learning everything through this one game.
Well,
Okay.
their next character didn't make that mistake in the next session.
So yeah, there are 6 traditions in Camarilla society. There's the aforementioned Masquerade, where you don't tell anybody about Vampire Club. There is the tradition of domain, where you respect another person's territory. There's the tradition of hospitality, where if you go to visit somebody else's territory, you present yourself and say, "Hey, I don't want you guys to freak out because there's another vampire in town. I'm here. I'm not going to steal your herd, your people. I'm not going to eat people without permission, just passing through." Or, "Hey, I've decided to move from, Texas up to Ottawa. Can I live here, please?"
Josh is now Prince of Ottawa.
Yes. That's how you do it. There's progeny, where you won't embrace somebody unless you have permission from those above you in the hierarchy. There is accounting, which is the fosterage that you mentioned earlier, where your actions reflect on your sire, the person who embraced you, until you've proven that you can be a respected and trusted member of kindred society. And finally, destruction, which is the right to kill other kindred, other vampires, is reserved for the people in charge. If you're just a low, newly embraced person, you don't get to decide that even though that guy's a jerk, he's a vampire, you can't just go kill him.
Yeah, three of them are almost identical to the rights of the Ashit, so but phrased
It's
differently.
funny how that works out.
Yeah, they're not rights; they are the traditions and rules, as opposed to Ashits are rephrased as the rights of things. So
Yeah.
different way of thinking about it, but ethical philosophy.
I mean, it's all point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Ashit has its own little version of the Masquerade, the right to ignorance, right? That's to protect us from banality. So humanity doesn't need to know that we're here. It's for their
Yeah.
good.
Well, it's also kind of a keep away hunters. Both of them have that as a
Yeah. Because they're probably the two groups that were most impacted by like the
yeah.
Inquisition, etc.
Most of the World of Darkness games that have, at least the ones that have a society with rules, actually have that rule in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Because even though like there's the mists with like vampires don't have anything like the mists. Well, most of the other games have something that makes it a bit more sense, even without like to hide things from humanity. But that would only go so far, and like you could just I don't know publish a book, go on television talking about it. Like that'd be bad. So
Yeah, but then the Venture would say, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Disregard."
yeah, but they need the rules for that, right? It's not just if there was no rules against it.
At the very least, there's a self-preservation instinct at
Yeah,
work. So,
yeah,
but it's a point of reference that if a changeling did meet a vampire and find out about these traditions, then it would be like, "Oh, okay, I kind of understand where you're coming from
yeah.
on this. Please don't eat me."
And that rule in particular, both games present it as ambiguous to how it applies to people who aren't to things that aren't mortals.
Hmm.
So you might be violating that by talking
I
to
was
each other.
just about to ask how many of these traditions and rites apply to other supernaturals.
It is ambiguous, and there is no clear rulings from the society.
That is fantastic because it means that in Chigg's game, yeah, if you tell someone that you're a vampire, even if they told you 5 minutes before then that they're a troll, it doesn't matter. You still breach the masquerade. We're going to kill you.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
it's not just in Chigg's game. in Chigg City, or in
Right.
this city, it might be in this county or duchy or barony, whatever, might have these rules applied this way, and then you go somewhere else and they think about it differently. Or some new person ends up in charge and interprets it differently.
That's the fun of the game.
Yeah.
Creative rule interpretation. That's the real game.
This is part of why people, when people talk about, oh, the Sabbat and the Shadow Court alignment, the thing that's much more interesting to me is like an Unseelie Anarch alignment. Like changelings who are just so over this whole nobility system. And
Yep.
not that there can't be Unseelie nobility as well, but
Well, there's also Sealy anti-nobility.
yeah, for sure.
That's a whole other can of...
Commoners and anarchs.
Yeah.
Upstart commoners and world-weary anarchs united.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing they have to lose are their chains.
It's true. They're cold iron chains.
Yeah, I was going to reference before. Yeah, it actually presents similar when we were talking before about diablerie, drinking, killing, drinking, eating other vampires. That actually, despite it being a different thing, it is presented as very similar to killing look with cold iron in Changeling.
Well, because you don't just eat Grandpa's blood, you also eat his soul.
Yeah, so there's examples of like sanctioned in Concordia killing with cold iron as like an execution because this is a Dante who keeps reincarnating or something. But
Right, but vampires again are not spiritual beings. They
yeah,
they don't die and come back. They just that's it. They're there forever. So they don't have to worry
mm-hmm.
about the cycle of reincarnation, the transmigration of souls or anything like that that the other
Yeah.
inhabitants of the world of darkness.
Oh, I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but the way they're treated in the two societies
Gotcha.
has some similarities.
Hmm.
They're like serious crimes that are sometimes actually officially condoned, but not often. Kind of, it's like the worst punishment. Okay, was there anything else we wanted to talk on this?
Well, on the subject of just encounters between the groups, so I know we've previously talked about enchanting vampires and we talked about the multipliers and everything, the banality levels. I think actually, to the point that Chigg made about the banality of vampires, like, I think people, when they say, oh, you should be able to muse a vampire, vampires should have low banality, etc., it's like, yeah, that Toreador may be an artist, but that Toreador has been sick of living for hundreds and hundreds
Yeah.
of years. But
When it comes to crossover and banality, and this is not just a change, this comes up a lot with Mage too. C20 has this very handy chart of what it means to be immortal at different banality ratings and sort of brief discussion of their personality. And I like to think of it that way. And you would end up with, just like in the technocracy, there'd be a lot of high banality people and not a lot of low banality people. In vampire society, especially once you've been around a while as a vampire, you're typically going to be high banality.
yeah,
I could definitely think of exceptions that would make sense. You could have a 200-year-old Toreador that actually is a dreamer, but they're very rare among Toreadors.
sure. Certainly not every vampire is a dreamer in the same way
Yeah.
that not every mortal is a dreamer. But it also points to how in a lot of vampire stories, one of like the key character traits
Yeah.
as the vampire gets older is desperately searching for anything to alleviate the boredom of being immortal.
Right, they have to fight against that ennui of existence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was the occasional thing in Vampire the Masquerade officially. I don't know if it's in V20, but like some of the revised stuff as a earlier was like it's talking about how vampires are completely incapable of experiencing true emotions and things like that. And I'm like, that turned me off that game so much. Like, and that would be like a higher banality thing, I think. But like you're literally dead inside, kind of, or figuratively dead inside, but that might be high banality. But I don't think that makes for a fun game to roleplay either. So
No. And we did point out in the Book of Lost Dreams episode how there is a lower difficulty from using Malkavians. Still not a great idea.
yeah, definitely don't ravage them.
No.
Any vampire, the least dangerous vampire is still very dangerous.
Yep.
So
that's their whole point.
Yeah, maybe you could win a fight against them. You don't want to
No.
get into that,
especially if they bite you.
So, which vampire clan would be the best one to rhapsodize?
Simisi.
I was thinking Ravnos.
Really?
Because what would the creation be if they used chemistry.
I just think Tsimisi because I want the satisfaction of the changeling, like burning down their flesh church or whatever.
I think the term you're looking for here is barbecue.
Oh, you have made the Samisi, you've now destroyed forever their ability to feel any creative impulse.
I just don't want to torture anymore.
Well, they could still do it. They're just their heart would never be in it, and it wouldn't be very inspired.
Right.
And the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
Samisi would
Right,
make fun of their
they're just
torture.
making the same giant war ghoul that they made
Yeah.
30 years ago again and again and again.
Yeah, and all the other Samisi are like, oh, it just his heart's not in it. You could tell it's just not.
You know, he used to be
Literally.
just a master.
Oh, here comes Vladislav.
Yeah. So now you have this like, oh, there'd be a weird enemy flaw. You're like, okay, the Samisi hates you because like you're playing like an autumn whatever fae, right? And 3 lifetimes ago you rhapsodized. It's the Samisi who now just hunts you every lifetime.
I'd like to officially enter into the record that for patron content, I am now going to make Vladislav the sad rhapsodized Tsimisi.
Please do. As a patron of the podcast, please do.
Yes. I did want to also touch on, so from the vampire side, I don't know that we need to get into like disciplines and stuff, but from the changeling side, a few handy tools to have in any changeling's pocket. Primal 2 lets you set things on fire. Summer 5 lets you set things on fire. Pyretics 2 and 4, I think, lets you set things on fire. These are useful things to have when confronted with a vampire.
Spring 5, if you really no, that wouldn't work on vampires.
Would it? Because that I'm wondering what would, because I actually think, and this may be this is the last thing that I want to get into for this discussion is story hooks, but Spring 5 turning a vampire back into a human for a scene, I would allow that for the story possibilities alone. Mechanics be damned.
You know, I like that because that's the whole thing too with vampires, like the whole redemption and trying to become human again. Because
Yeah. But there's also, speaking of the Spring 5 thing, the Kiasid actually also, in one of the versions of their discipline Mythosyria, the ultimate level of it is called the grandest trick, where you can become human for a day. But in order to do it, you have to drain all the blood of a human. And I almost kind of want to make it available to not just like the oldest Kiasid to, again, create that storyline. Like, what if there's some ritual vampires can do to become human for a day? And
yeah, I like that Spring 5 act or whatever
yeah,
of like, yeah, you're human for a bit and you can't make it again for another moonrise, and yeah,
incentive to keep that changeling around and alive again.
Just in case.
Some other story ideas might be overlap between a changeling's dreamers and a vampire's herd. Maybe a joint Thalain Sabbat wild hunt kind of extravaganza. Maybe a returning she had some kind of ancient pact formed with a vampire elder that they're now cashing in 300 years later, or I guess 600 years later.
I mean, an obvious one is if you're changing the type to go hook up at a club, that could go very badly.
Yes. The general rule of thumb for drinking fey blood from a vampire perspective is bad idea.
Yeah, it's enchantment, but also some almost bedlam-like effects on top of that. So
Yeah, only the not fun parts.
It's a bad trip, you guys.
yeah.
Yep. I do want to share one snippet from the revised clan book Toreador for Vampire. So, as with many of the splat books, there are the stereotypes that the narrator of the clan book has about the different groups in the world of darkness. Anyway, in this case, they're talking about the fairies, and it says, "These things seem to be kind of like soul parasites on human beings. They hate all of our kind, which is a damn shame because they seem drawn to civilization like moths to fire. Sound like anyone you know? I heard a pretty amusing story about a catfight between one of our clan and some fey noble back in the court of the Sun King. Both of them wanted to be girl with the most cake for some painter who saw the vampire by night and the fey chick by day. It ended with a confrontation like every good story. The fairy got drained dry as earth. The Toreador went absolutely bugshit crazy, forever. The artist never painted again. That's how things tend to work out with the Fae. Pretty stories, ugly endings. And I think that just sums it all up in like
Yep.
one little package. So
Yeah, that covers it.
yeah.
Yep. If you're running a Changeling game and your players are way too knowledgeable about vampire and it's like coming in, one thing I did once was introduce a chimerical vampire who was causing problems, and people didn't know it was a chimerical vampire. So
Hmm.
that if it's a kind of game where the players are like dealing with problems in their area and like the local nobilities having them go deal with it or whatever reason they're going to try help their dreamers or something's draining them, and you can make a chimera actually be a folklore vampire quite easily, and then that can be a neat little
Mhm.
thing.
That sounds super fun.
Yeah, and it works best if the players are doing a bit too much the wrong kind of metagaming of bleeding
Mhm.
through expecting like kindred society.
Honestly, I think it would be best if they tracked down Kindred Society and got in trouble from both sides because hey, how did you hear that there were vampires around here? We're
Yep.
that's a masquerade breach.
And meanwhile, it's just the chimera could just be nightmares based on culture of vampires, right?
Right. It's
So
just some kid stayed up too late and watched Bram Stoker's Dracula.
yeah, I definitely gave him a cape.
Obviously.
No capes. I think it's worth asking how necessary crossover is too. Like, if you are playing or if you are running a changeling game and you're thinking about including vampires, it's like, okay, first of all, does this chronicle need them?
Hmm.
And if it doesn't need them and you just want them, that's fine. But I think it's
Yeah,
important to acknowledge that because that will inform the choices you make about how to integrate them. Because you'll get different kinds of stories suited to one kind of game or another.
yeah. Any of the World of Darkness games can be some kind of at least antagonistic crossover with Changeling.
Mhm.
You'd have to have a very long chronicle for bringing in all of them and it not being just too much. So,
Yeah.
and you could get by with none of it too, right?
Yeah.
Like you can just do strictly by Changeling. That's fine.
Crossover is never really necessary unless you're planning on running a crossover game from the start.
Yeah, and we're talking about crossover. There's kind of different meanings here. I think Mage PCs with Changeling PCs can work well. Some of the other games, in theory, could work well. I'm not saying it's impossible, but a vampire PC with Changeling PCs, that's
Funny you should mention that because that is the setup for what is, I guess, half canonically the only vampire changeling crossover book that we ever got, which was a novel, Pomegranates Full and Fine, published in
Mhm.
December 1995 by, what's his name? Don Brassingthwaite or whatever. We haven't read it, or Chigg has read it, but
It is
Yeah,
definitely a book that exists and is on my shelf.
and it's set in Toronto.
it is. And it also has Nefandi in it because why stop at two splats?
So Pomegranates is a very first edition book. So none of the groups have really been fleshed out. There's no subtlety to anything. It's all very, hi, I am a knocker and I am into BDSM because reasons.
Because White Wolf.
Yes, exactly. I don't think I've ever read anything else by Don Bassingthwaite. Apparently, he's written quite a few books for looks like Forgotten Realms and Eberron and D&D tie-in novels. I don't believe I've ever read
Mm.
anything else by him, and this, as far as I'm aware, this may be his very first book ever written. I'm not trying to tear him down or anything, but it is not a great book. I'll put it, that's my real quick
Mm.
review. If you want to read it, more power to you. Track yourself down a copy, make your own judgment on it.
Is this badly written in your mind and a bad setting example, or is it?
Um, it's not great.
Yeah.
It's, like I said, it may be the guy's first novel he ever wrote. I don't want to tear him
Oh yeah.
down or anything, but no, it's it's not missing a lot of commas or anything. It's technically well
It's
written, but
it's well edited. Okay.
sure. But the story itself, it's very, like I said, there's no subtext. There's no, it's all right there on the page. So it's very simple, but it's not very good.
It's not a thing you could be like, this is what happened in your setting, and use it as like a
No,
backstory when you
I
work
would,
on
I
it.
would, but again, I feel the same way about the toy box novels. I think the dialogue in those is horrible. I think that the characterization in those is remarkably poor and shallow, and I don't know if this is because when they were written they didn't have anything deeper to go by than what is in the core book, and everything in all of the World of Darkness first edition core books is very surface level
Partly by
because that's
necessity.
what a core book is for.
I think the gaming books that come, not that Pomegranate's Full of Fun has a gaming book with it like that trilogy did, but like those were stronger, I guess. So I guess my question is, if they had done that like they did with the Immortalized trilogy, would it have potentially been a good book as a Changeling supplement separate from the novel in your mind?
That is an interesting question. I think the answer is no, because I don't think that Pomegranates adds anything new to the setting aside from this one very specific story.
Mm.
It's more of a
Yeah.
vampire novel with a changeling protagonist than the other way
It
around.
very much is, which again makes sense. Vampire was the bigger game of the two.
And the more established game, like 1990, that was when Changeling came out.
Yeah,
Same
Yeah.
year.
I would like to give one charitable comment to the novel,
please do.
which I think is the same comment that I would give to like the Immortalized trilogy, which is in terms of its usefulness to a reader now, I think what it does do, because as much as there is no subtext sometimes, there is also mixed with that, in both cases, I think, narration of how each group perceives the other. That's not boiled down to like, oh, this must be your art of primal or your discipline of obfuscate. So even if that helps a reader conceptualize, oh, I have to think of this in more nuanced, characterized terms rather than just the dots on the sheet, even if they don't do it in the same way that it's done in the novel, I think that's an important cognitive step to take as a player. But
I agree. I agree with you
that's my
100%.
charitable comment. Do you know what? There were so many books like it on the shelf in Barnes and Noble at the time.
Yeah.
I think there was much worse out there. There was also much better.
Oh, but I just have one question. Does it reference like Persephone or anything like that with the name, or is it just?
I don't think
Not
so.
that I recall. I mean, like obliquely,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay.
I think it does reference the box actually, though. When you said that, I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing that in there." So,
Oh, okay. So what we really needed was a Changeling Wraith crossover book. That,
yeah, well,
For all your sexy Slua action.
so if you're a completionist, that exists. You can get
yes.
that along with your Kithbook trolls and your few other things.
Dear listeners, is why I have a copy, because I am a completionist.
Yeah.
Hey. The bottom line, though, when I think about sort of the thematic synergies between the two games, because it is tough in a broad sense. Like you could find this specific changeling from this kith would work well with a vampire from this specific clan. But I think what unites them overall is that they strike me as the two groups who are most concerned with the doings of mortals in very different
Mm-hmm.
ways, but they need mortal connections much more than like werewolves or mages or even wraiths maybe. So I think that's a starting point to explore from.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Is there anything, Chig, that you want to shout out that you're worked on or doing or anything like that?
Well, like I said previously, I am a co-host of Darker Days Radio. That is a podcast covering the world and chronicles of darkness, as well as other various darker themed role-playing games. We also cover Warhammer and its role-playing games. If you're interested in any of that, you can find us online at darker-days.org. So yeah, give us a listen. We've put out some books on Storyteller's Vault. I've edited the majority of those.
Mm-hmm.
Some good stuff out there.
Links will be provided in the show note.
Yeah, and Darker Days Radio is the other podcast that sometimes has changeling content that's still around.
I try, but I'm the only one holding that
Yeah.
candle.
But there was a few others that have kind of seemed to have stopped. But
So yeah, that's it. If listeners want to find me, why? You can find me on Mastodon. I'm Sandsugar at dice.camp. But again, the podcast is way more interesting than me.
I know one place to find you is on our Discord for Changeling the Podcast at discord.me/CTP. You can also find us at ChangelingPod at dice.camp. Same Mastodon server as Chigg there. You can go to our website, changelingthepodcast.com. Send us an email, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. And we do have a Facebook page, for Changeling the Podcast. So once again, I'm Josh.
I continue to be Puka.
I am always Chigg.
Just remember, if the vampire drains you, at least they'll go crazy.
Blood for the blood god, glamour for the glamourpotamus.
Within the pantheon of quasi-cosmic beings that populate the world of darkness, the glamourpotamus is among the less vindictive ones, but has still been known to utterly devour those it deems offenses to the sensibilities of the dreaming. Its last known meal was a redcap bassist in a Dave Matthews cover band. This should not, however, be taken as a sign of the dreaming's attitude towards all 90s alternative rock, some of which can be cringingly instructive to the world of darkness's metaphysical particulars. After all, in connection with this episode's themes, we learned from one Chicago outfit in 1995 that the world is a vampire sent to Drayane, and what could be a more emo way to conceive of banality? If you think of one, please feel free to reach out to us on our social media links provided in the show notes, or leave us a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience. Getting the word out about our show helps motivate us to continue bringing Changeling the Dreaming content to you. Another way to support us is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast, for which you get perks including a shout-out at the end of each episode like the following superstars: Derek, Dorcatus, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sanjigger, Sija, and Terry Robinson. Thanks as always for your attention. May the glamourpotamus bless and keep you, and until next time, keep on dreaming.
Here come the outtakes.
At some point, we'll have to do a Demon the Fallen episode. But
Will we?
I think so.
It's just going to be 45 minutes of me growling, so...
You mean Changeling Revised?
Yeah. Okay, it is also like Changeling written by a vampire fan, really is how it.
Oh yeah, it's emo goth Changeling.
Like maybe I'll do an episode on that. Has that sound? And I'll edit it.
You do that and I'll handle Changeling the Lost. That'll be our
Okay, yeah.
exchange.
Oh, Dark Ages Fae too. Will be.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Later
Do I come back for
later
that, Chigg?
problems.
I mean, if you'd like to have someone come on and tell you why no one should ever buy it or play it, sure, I'd be happy to come back for that.
Yeah. Okay, I don't hate it as much as you, so that's another.
No one does, but that's okay. It's my own personal peccadillo. I don't care for it.
Yep. I ran it. That was my problem with it. One of my problems with it. But anyway. I got all of them right.
Sorry, I was clicking things.
Do you have an Instagram?
I think you did.
I think that's all. No, we don't have an Instagram.
Yet.
Can't.
Yeah.
If you want to do that one, Puka.
Are you on Tumblr?
Not anymore.
Do you TikTok?
TikTok is a children's dancing app.
Is it?
If we ever got like if we could get like the right filters for TikTok for like chimerical reality though.
But then we'd have to hashtag everything with family.
Isn't that like our next episode we're recording?
Oh, it is, isn't it? Stay tuned, listeners.